Well, I think we're running a tick behind, but I think we now have a quorum, so I'll let Carla call the roll.
Pardon me. Mark Arnold.
Here.
Whitney Hall.
Here.
Marvin Cusick. Eddie Mack. David Mason.
Here.
Cole Ream.
Here.
John Roberts. James Simonek. Jonathan Waddell.
Here.
That is a quorum.
All right, so I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us at this March 18th, 2019 special study session for the proposed sidewalk ordinance revisions. I will turn that over to city staff. And has anybody got anything to open with or discuss or?
I think Carol and Robert are handling our presentation.
Okay.
Well, I have given you guys a history of the ordinances that have been approved and a copy of sidewalk variances. And you can see that we've revised it a lot over the years. This is really your opportunity to give us your ideas about how you think it would do better. You know, how it could be phrased better, how we could find the right balance. I think all we're really talking about are the sidewalks paralleling the street. I don't think we're getting variances on sidewalks paralleling the street for commercial, industrial, special use properties. I think residential has worked itself out, and I don't think we've had any variances about the internal aspects of the property. So I think what we're here to talk about are the sidewalks paralleling the street.
I'll go first. I just jotted down some thoughts that I had on this, and I didn't put them in any legal jargon or anything, so I'll just bear with me. Just having watched this over the last 2 years, it seems like a very, very unfair method, the way we're doing it. We give some people variances, other people we don't. So it seems like to me somehow we need to just clean that up, and I think that's what we're here to do. So just a few of the notes that I put down was that I don't think that we ought to require any residential areas, current residential areas, to be forced to put in a sidewalk at all. We seem to always give a variance on that. I think we need to just take that out completely. I do think that all new development or an extension of an existing development, if they filled up 30 lots and they come back and they add another street to that, I know that's the same addition, but they need to continue on. And I think that they need to put sidewalks on every one of those, which I think everyone agrees. I think the ordinance already requires, and that should be at the cost of the builder. Talked to a couple people, instead of the cost of the developer on that, because if those sidewalks go in too early, they get broke when they run across them with those big trucks. So I think it does need to come at the very end when the unit or the home is actually built. I think personally what we need to do on the commercial side is to actually define where we want sidewalks. Instead of saying we're going to put one here, then we're going to give these 2 variances and we're going to put in another one. There's no continuity to that at all. I think we need to sit down and decide that we're going to do blocks 1 through block 12 on Owen K. Garrett. I'm making that up, but just wherever we designate the main priority that we do that. And then set out a way to do that. And the other thing is, I don't think it ought to be at the cost of the property owner. And I'll tell you why, because one property comes along and it's smooth and flat and easy to lay a sidewalk. The next one comes along, they have drainage issues or drainage construction to try to get across, and the cost goes from a minimal amount of their budget to a large part of their budget, and then we get into wanting to give them a variance again. You see, it has got to be some continuity all the way down. And I think the way to do that, and what I've looked at, and I've talked to several different people, is just roughly online, I think, and I know staff would know much better than I would, because I'm sure the information I was looking at online was wrong, but I think there's just short of 20,000 homes, actual homes, here in Enid, which would pay a water bill or a utility bill. If we would surcharge $1, just $1 on that, that would roughly be $20,000 a month, or $236,000, almost $237,000 a year after 12 months. The city mentioned to us a month ago, 2 months ago, that they think it costs about $13 a square foot for a sidewalk, which seems high to me, but maybe it is $13 when you average in everything. But if we collected $237,000 a year, and you take $13 a square foot for a 5-foot wide sidewalk, each year we could do 3,642 running feet of sidewalk in an area that we want it done. See what I'm saying? And we wouldn't have this, giving this one a variance and that one not, and because they're all good causes. A barbecue place last month, I understand why he didn't want to do it, but now then we have yet another location that we don't have a sidewalk at, and the JUCO World Series are coming up. I've watched those boys get off those buses at those motels and walk down those bar ditches to go to the academy. And we're about to have, hopefully, a movie theater someday that will have a lot of foot traffic down that area. So I just think we need to have more continuity and not give it all away in variances. If we want sidewalks in an area, we need to have sidewalks in that area. But we need to have a mechanism to pay for it.
So what I'm hearing from you is, with what we've done with the trails, we had a plan, we had a funding source, the city laid all that out and said, okay, these are the streets that get them, this is the order in which we lay them down, boom, it's in there. I think one of the things that we have to look at right off the bat is the degree to which the water rate has changed just in the last 3-4 years.
what?
The water rate, the dollars per thousand that are being charged,
I understand that.
we're already doubling. So putting that on the backs of some of our people, they won't have the money to do that. And this would completely take sidewalks out of anything to do with what's being developed or what's changing. I think where I get the most frustrated with what's been coming to us so far is, one, we need to exclude anything that's on undeveloped roads or streets. If you're on dirt or gravel, there's no reason to have a sidewalk. If there's no curbage,
And
there
that,
shouldn't be a
that should be an
sidewalk.
ordinance to where if
And-
it's,
Yeah,
Already is.
It's one of the
And-
changes that was made early on.
Yeah.
right, but we still get some of those, you know, like we had one just last month. But what I also get frustrated about is, with that same barbecue joint, we were talking about 110 square foot extension is what triggered the ordinance. That sounds tiny. That's like when we've had people come and say, hey, I want to add something on just to put in a space for my water heater. What they didn't say is all the permits that they've pulled, all the work they're doing, that's getting a whole new roof, it's getting new siding, it's getting completely
gutted.
gutted on the inside. And if you looked at the cost of the project in total, this would have been exactly the project that you throw adding a sidewalk on. But that wasn't brought out to us. I don't know if that was brought out during the city commission meeting afterwards. It sounded like it was this little itty bitty project and they're slapping some paint on and we're gonna
All you have to do is
reopen.
drive by there and tell that they
Right.
Exactly.
totally
Right, and that one
renovated
happens to be on Garriott where you'd see it. You know, and if we all make a concerted effort to go drive to each and every place, we might be able to figure that out. But that's come up several times with the variance request or with trying to change zoning, for instance. You hear this much of the story and not the full picture, and people can skew it very well. So I think part of what we need to look at is how do we encompass cost of a change versus cost of a sidewalk or a project? There needs to be some kind of relationship in which you will not be spending more on a sidewalk than you would on the project that would trigger it, you know?
Well, and I think we all agree, we want sidewalks. I think, and we pick at these little small things like that. I think what we need to do, and of course we're gonna get it figured out tonight, but I think we need to look at, you know, in the grand scheme of things, where do we want sidewalks? Who's gonna pay for them? To go to your point, and when do we do it? And if we look at that broader picture, that broad overall picture, we answer these little specific questions. And so, you know, I would start with, where do we want them? Where does this ordinance say that we should put them now? We all want them. We know that they should be in new residential. We all agree with that, I think, right?
I think David makes an excellent point about putting them in when the structure's completed.
That's the way that they're all being done, to my knowledge. I know that Pheasant Run, West Side, East Side developed prior to the sidewalk ordinance. Every person who builds a house builds their pro rata share of sidewalk. So you may temporarily have a hole in the continuous sidewalk until David builds his house there. But that's a place we know people want to walk. The public says we want sidewalks there, and we're willing to pay for them. And so you've got, so I think we're probably all in agreement, new residential development, certainly. You've got your arterial streets, that's some of the streets we're talking about. Broadway's a great example where we're coming from the colleges and going west. There's a great
The
example.
funding on that project, that's what I wanted to inquire. How was that funded? Did any of those property owners abutting pay for the sidewalks?
No. Robert will give you the details.
You're talking about the Broadway Trail?
Sidewalk, trail, yes, both.
It's funded, I think, partially through a grant and through the trail funds. It was a trail program, so it was funded through grants and from city funds, the trail through on Broadway.
So we have we have a formalized trail system, but in the context of the grant writers, and each of you have been a part of this process, as I've observed over periods of years, it's a function of where you carefully designate your trails, and you will find an alternate funding source that will help you from another higher level.
That's true.
So consequently, part of this is city trying to look at the available programs of how you identify, and it looks to me like all of the arterial streets, and one of the major ones that we spoke about and just dealt with, that's a logical location to see, to utilize in the context of a trail, and then we can seek a return of part of our federal dollars, part of our state dollars, and part of our local dollars to fund this program, and the grant writers have that ability.
And the trail system is obviously one place that's been identified. Once again, we would all agree that it's where it should be. We're not right up against the street. We try to get, you can't put a trail system every half mile. It's not feasible, but we're picking spots. And that's one of the things that we can look at in the overall picture. Where do we want them? Let's get people to the trail. Let's continue that on if we can. Obviously, you know, money is an object there. And so arterial streets, new development, the trail, identify places.
But by doing it like that, you have identified where you want the trails prior to.
Absolutely.
If we try to tie it, Whitney, like you were talking about, to a construction dollar amount, then there's a trigger. That means that if this business owner does something that triggers it, there'll be a sidewalk. If this one never does anything, there will never be a sidewalk.
And that's part of what we're here to discuss is, do we need to stand this on end and say, this is no longer related to development, that this is purely a city budgetary matter, that as funds become available, we put in sidewalks, or are we putting any of the ownership on the property owner themselves to maintain or add sidewalks in their area?
And by us identifying like I said to start with, where exactly do we want them? We want where people are going to walk.
Right.
We don't need them in places where people aren't going to walk. We don't need them in Enid Energy Center. I mean, I know Gary, it is a contentious issue, but some of those are more driving destinations. To your point, I've seen people also walk from the hotel to IHOP or to the mall or whatever. That's not an issue that's going to be solved by the private sector. And some of these issues that we have been banging around on, a lot of the questions we have are, where does the public sectors, the city, where do their responsibilities lie versus the private sector? It's more than just having someone build a pro rata share of sidewalk when we're talking streets. And so I think if we concentrate, like I said, on the big picture about identifying where exactly it is we want to have the walk trail. We already are in agreement on residential neighborhoods. We love the trail. I use it. I love it. I think it's great. And so when we identify those areas, what are the city's priorities? Certainly because they have to consider the cost just like the private sector does. So, but I think we're definitely making some good points here. So
If we're going to go point by point, then because what it sounds like to me is we've first got to designate the where. We've got to figure out what the funding mechanism is going to be, and then we've got to figure out when it's going to. And the reason why I emphasize on the when, I don't think necessarily we should throw out the baby with the bathwater with this particular what we already have in writing. The mechanism that we have right now, I think, isn't all bad. The fact that we have a trigger right now, and the way that we apply it tends to cause confusion and it tends to get people a little bit contentious. We have the saying, the sidewalk to nowhere. If we use the mechanism now in order to be able to, rather than have individuals put the sidewalks in themselves and just have that, okay, once you do hit this number, the money goes into a pot, and then the city takes that money, and then there's a sidewalk project based on this pot of money that there's now a plan that lays out that we're going to go this section to this section to this section. This eliminates the mindset of a sidewalk to nowhere. But before we can get to that point, we have to get to understand from a thought process of where we want these sidewalks. And I think we can, again, we've already agreed on new residential, but I think there's still some conversation to be made in terms of old residential, because everybody here right now exists in an old residential area. At least if we're living there now, it's already been there. And so most of the people who have complaints about not being able to walk in their own communities and walk in their own neighborhoods have that problem. And so it's an existing problem, and a problem that we need to find a solution towards. The other thing we're going to have to discuss is in terms of, it's not just leisurely walking. The walking, in order to be able to get from place to place, has to do with economic development and the ability to be able to walk our commercial areas. So we can't just take that completely off the table and not discuss that aspect of it either. We've got to talk about whether or not we want to make our commercial areas walkable in order for people in the hotels, like we've already talked about, that want to go to a restaurant or want to go to a shopping area, whether or not we're going to supply them a walkable area, a means to get from place to place. And so if we can look at those areas and designate, whether it be on a map or by neighborhood or whatever the case may be, and prioritize level of importance as this area is more important than this one. And then supply that forward. I think that would be beneficial I know it would be beneficial for me to be able to understand from this committee what your priorities, what you believe they are. Because I've got in my own head what I'd love to see happen. It doesn't do me any good if I'm the only person in the room that feels that way.
well, no, and I think you could certainly look at where are the footpaths. People, carving a foot trail in an area is certainly something to look at versus where do we never see. Maybe you saw one person there, maybe their car broke down. I mean, things happen. I think you could safely say that at any point in the city of Enid, somebody has walked there. And so to maximize what our effect is, I think I would concur with you. We need to concentrate where we see that traffic. But at the same time, same thing, we need to look at Willow, for example. We got sidewalks there. Well, to kind of skip to the who pays for and the timing of that road was redone. We got sidewalks, and in some cases, There are some engineering things that have to be addressed that the private sector is not going to be able to do or shouldn't have to pay for. And we need to look at exactly what those city targets are and so on and so forth, so we can, you don't want 20 years later to have a broken sidewalk in between new sidewalks. We want to try to have some continuity. I don't know that putting money in the bank is necessarily the answer, especially at $60.
Sure.
If we can pour them for 15, I think that becomes a fine, not a fee.
Well, once we, I mean, again, if we've got a funding pot that now the city has the ability to operate out of, you're more likely to have a crew that's working around, year long in terms of implementing that. That's a lot more cost effective than what we've been doing up until this point. So
Bid out 1,000 running feet versus 200 running feet. I mean, I think we all know that you get a lot better bid on that, most likely.
All works out well too, because at some point these are all going to be maintained.
exactly.
And you'd still have that funding in place to maintain.
Exactly. And then again, if we work on priority and based on priority, if there are certain areas that, quite frankly, don't get utilized that much that we just don't get to at some point in time, we've still put an emphasis on the areas that have the highest level of foot traffic and the areas in which we've designated as the highest priority. And if we have to change that at some point, we can. But as it stands right now, I think we need to get to a point to where we set a priority, because we don't have one right now.
Trying to kind of stay with a hybrid approach, would you, in addition to just coming up with some other funding, whether it be water meters or whatever, you've got stormwater fees and some other fees that you attach to some of these projects, have a sidewalk, fee. So you're still tagging something with every permit that goes, maybe kind of figure out what percentage that is, what portion of it.
But one of the biggest problems with doing this is we're still in a mindset that the city of Enid wants sidewalks. We don't want to pay for them. We're going to try to figure out how to get the private sector to pay for them. To your point, if you're renting an apartment, paying water bill, you're not developing anything. You're not.
I disagree. And here's why. Because every individual who does pay sales tax inside this community puts the money inside the budget, and the city does pay sidewalks. It's just they don't do every sidewalk. And so and this is where it goes back to where, as a business owner, or as a particular homeowner, and this is your property and you're developing this property, this is why we said, okay, is there more onus on that business owner who's collecting revenue because they're getting people who walk through that door using that sidewalk? Is there more onus on them than the guy who owns a 600 square foot house, on the east side somewhere, to contribute in that pot where he doesn't get any direct benefit from that sidewalk being there? And so how much responsibility are we going to put on the entire populace as opposed to the individual who's directly benefiting from that sidewalk being there?
And that's where we might tag in on the end of the trail program, for instance, is saying, okay, we found a funding mechanism. Once that is complete, then we're going to ask that it just be continued, and this becomes now just general sidewalks versus trying to create something brand new. Because when we get back to whether it's stormwater fee or whatever else, I use the bare minimum. Typically my water bill every month is $43.42, which it recently changed, but it's 1 unit per month.
Sure.
And when you start adding in those units for extra people, or because people overwater their yards or what have you, that's a very small percentage of that. I mean, you're still well under $100 if you're using 3 and 4 units of water in one given month. You already have this huge trash and stormwater and all other random fee piece in there that's just set, and for many of us, that's not our problem. We don't have an issue at the end of the month coming down to saying, okay, I have $4 left. I'm worried $1 isn't going to be that much each month. Hopefully they're getting that back with how the federal taxes changed, but how many times do you nick somebody before they die from the 1,000 cuts? So maybe what we need to lay out is, what are our priorities? Because we're not going to write this tonight by any means. So where do we need the priorities? Are there places we can add exemptions because we always see the variances from XYZ? Are there certain conditions in which a property may need to be exempted solely because of drainage or access or railroad involvement, what have you. And then how can we work with the city who knows their funding sources and their budgetary restraints and the grant sources? And how can we then pull that together? Because this is probably going to take a few study sessions.
Yeah, I don't think we solve it tonight.
Well, and that's why I think the benefit, the benefit of putting it into a pot, as opposed to, okay, now it's the responsibility of that individual to say, okay, to figure out how to work out the drainage issues and all the rest of that. It goes into the pot, and then that becomes the city's responsibility. And while at the same time, they're looking for other revenue sources in order to be able to fund all of that.
So by that statement, you're saying you're not putting a sidewalk in on your own property when something triggers.
Correct.
This will go somewhere else.
Basically, there's the trigger takes place, and then the percentage that's designated of that project now goes into the city to pay for that sidewalk, and then based on that priority. And I know it's gonna aggravate some folks, because some folks are gonna pay into that pot, and they're not gonna get a sidewalk right away.
But the good thing of that, though, is you can control the percentage of what you charge.
Exactly.
Right.
To keep it a light lift, instead of, I'm adding 80 square foot, and I'm having to build a corner of sidewalk, which is 3, 4, 5 times the addition to my building.
Exactly.
So if I'm doing an 80 square foot and it's 8,000, and the commission says, well, the percentage is gonna be $80, then that's what I pay. And I just made those numbers up.
No,
But it's a way for the city commission to keep it a light lift on a person that's actively improving their business, which is what we want.
Well, and another thing you could do, obviously $60, as it's written out, is a very egregious amount, which could lead to, in some of our previous examples, could lead to well over $100,000. Perhaps if we did it on an actual cost and say, we know it's going to be, this week if you put it in, it's going to $15.87 per running foot. Let's let you pay a fee equal to that. Prices are going to fluctuate, but they're not going to fluctuate that much over the period of that I've been around. It's not fluctuated by $40 or $50. I think that's where a lot of the pushback comes on the fee, because it is such an egregious amount that it doesn't make common sense. And so when we're looking at where do we want to put them, okay, we can't put it right here, right now, because Robert's got to come up with some engineering plans. We're at some point going to redo this part of the road. We don't need this right now. We know it's coming. We know at some point this area is going to be widened, it's going to be redone, so on and so forth. Let's put that there, but let's not penalize somebody because of that. Let's let them go ahead and have what you would call a market rate, I would suppose would be the best way to put that. So that's one possible solution to the happy medium between not having them and having the private sector pay for their pro rata share.
Rather than $1 per frontage or $1 per square foot addition, would it not be worth looking at, and this might be too cumbersome with the way permits are called, but potentially something that says, 0.1% of your project cost goes into sidewalk. And then,
And that's kind of what I was gearing towards.
And there's certainly a matter where you have Club 30 adding 80 square feet at $100, that'd be 8,000. I doubted they're going to spend that much. The sidewalk fee would be 24,000, 3 times the project cost. But if you were doing a $5 million, $6 million retail development, and you have triggers in your lease that says we will be open with our shelves stocked on April 1st. We will open our doors at 8 a.m., or we're going to fine you $25,000, or we're going to negate our lease, or so on and so forth. I've seen these in leases. And so if you're doing a $5 million project, you're not going to argue over a $15,000 sidewalk. In fact, if you're a smart developer, you're going to have your concrete guy probably throw it in. When we're doing smaller business projects, that's where we're seeing the hit.
That's the concept that Commissioner Waddell has introduced. It's
Yeah.
a percentage, not a size.
Right.
And he separated it. You're no longer tied to the cost of what it actually takes to build the sidewalk. You're doing a project with a certain value, and a certain percentage of that is going to be charged at permit time, and it's gonna go into the pot, and the city will eventually put in a sidewalk program
Right.
or project where it designates it wants them.
Based on,
busy?
based on the priority that we set in terms of the map that we
Yes,
say we
if-
want this area.
And if it's not a priority, obviously, to have a site, and I keep going back to Enid Energy Center because there's 3 houses in a square mile there. If we have a destination that's obviously a drive-to destination like that, that sidewalk ordinance shouldn't even come up. There's nobody in fact, we don't really want people walking out there where there's a lot of truck traffic. We need it in areas where they're walking to the store to go to work, or we're walking from the hotel over to IHOP to have a
What
coffee.
what about the locations that we've already given variances for? If they come back in now and say, I'm gonna do $1 million addition to this thing, and you can't charge me a percentage of that cost because you've already given me a variance.
That's a new project.
I was gonna say, I would think that variance would.
That would be a new project. I mean, obviously, there's been things done up to
That
this day.
variance doesn't stay with them? I mean, just for that project?
If we tore down Swadley's and went up with a entirely new structure, an entirely new project, that's a new day. And then that's when we say, let's talk about putting money in the pot, because obviously there's some engineering things. Eventually ODOT could come in and redo part of that, so.
And I'd be interested to know what staff thinks. I mean, I said $1 on a utility bill. That's, are there other funding mechanisms out there that are available that,
Yeah, we definitely need city staff on this, so.
I mean,
You do, there are grants in there, but a lot of the grants that we're talking about, particularly for like the trail, they're tied to specific areas that meet economic qualifications and different, there are different triggers that do it. So the area in which we're talking, whether, on like O&K Garriott, you're going to be hard pressed to be able to find, some type of grant that's going to help you pave areas like that, the vast majority of those areas. And remember, with those particular grants, for some of those areas, they end up being like CDBG grants and things like that. These are grants that are used in order for like youth programs and making poor people to get roofs on their homes and stuff like that. We don't want. I mean, I personally wouldn't want to dig into that one for this particular for something like this. And that's, by all means, that doesn't cover all of them. But this is, again, to me, I think, another benefit to putting it in the hands of the city staff in order to be able to be the ones to go chase out those grants. So if something does come available, that they know the pot that they're working with, and they're dual-headed, because now they're searching out these other mechanisms in order to be able to fund it. I think one of the biggest issues that we've had with this is that we put the burden on individuals throughout the community in order to be able to do that without any real advisement except, hey, find a way in order to be able to get it done and fund it. And the salt in the wound is by the way, you're not going to connect it to any other sidewalk, and it's going to go into the corner of a fence somewhere or something like that. And that's just, kicking somebody when they're down.
And I think we could use, obviously throughout this ordinance, there's a cost sharing thing. I look at the sidewalk that runs along Quanah on, behind the Broyles mini storage center. And it's 29 and a half feet from connecting to the city's trail system. At $60 a foot, that's $1,700. Yeah. I think surely there are some grants or there's some funding that could be done for some of that. I think, or it cancels that grass. It cancels it at an existing house.
We fixed that with the map.
Maybe we turn. Maybe the city says, okay, you put in the sidewalk, we're going to actually put in a ramp. We're going to spend $1,000 here, $1,000 here. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Sure.
And so perhaps that's something where we could work with some developers on some of those type of issues as a cost sharing program.
One of the reasons why we have gaps like that is because one of the biggest mechanisms that a sidewalk gets put in from the city is that if they're, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if we're redoing a road in that same area and that's part of the easement and all the things, but some of these areas that aren't connected to a road aren't going to be really looked at hard by the city in terms of putting a sidewalk in unless there's some type of an ADA complaint or something along those lines. And so if we put this priority and we put it in the map and we say that we want the city to take a good hard look in these specific areas about putting sidewalks in, and we're giving you a revenue source in order to be able to draw from in order to be able to get it done, it now becomes a priority and it now becomes something that they can look at these areas.
That's one of those where things where we have the ability in less than 30 feet to connect a neighborhood to the walk trail. That goes back to where we're actually, I mean, obviously, we could sit here and write out lists for the next 40 minutes or
Yeah,
20 minutes.
So to
excuse me.
get back to the actual code that we have right now, right now, anything that's brand new, that's gonna get a sidewalk. Anything that is a major expansion, infill, that kind of stuff, that's on an improved road, non-agricultural, we're having them do sidewalks. So the first question needs to be, obviously for new stuff, we want to keep them putting in their own sidewalk as they go. For anything that's a redevelopment, an infill, that sort of thing, do we want them to even do that if we want there to be this new pot that is creating sidewalks in a orderly manner? If no, then are we just gonna say in here, hey, you know, instead of having the ability to petition for a fee, all of these things, you get your permit, we're gonna come in and assess the value of your remodel, expansion, etc. Here's the percentage that we're gonna apply against that project, that will be your fee. And then just call that good, and then it's up to the commission or whomever to then go in and say, okay, we have this pot of money, let's go, this is this year's concentration. We're gonna try to connect within 1,000 feet of every school and grocery store in this town. Go. And then, once we achieve that, what is our next big onus? Do we have somewhere that's left as an island? Is there someplace that we're already seeing needs to be fixed because trees or age, what have you, has ruined them? Because I think we're all on the same page, and we can continue to support each other for the rest of the evening and not even get to our normal meeting. But to have some solid takeaways for staff, I think is a good place to go with the time we have remaining.
Oh, Chairman, a couple of things, just going to say on infrastructure fees on stormwater, there's actually two levels. There's the utility fee, which is based on existing problems. The stormwater plan actually identified and proportioned existing stormwater matters to be addressed, and that's paid for a utility fee. For basic commercial, it's based on amount of impervious surface. Residential, it's based on just a set fee per household typically. And then for the new development pays their impact fees to provide for the impact from new development that it has on the drainage system, and that's based on impervious surface as well. So we have a sanitary sewer capital improvement fee, which is on utility. It's an additional charge on utility rate. Goes only for sanitary sewer capital improvement. We have water. I think recently the quarter-cent sales tax, there was sales tax for capital improvements, which is now dedicated to water. So that partially funds that. The rest of the improvement projects, including streets, municipal facilities, sidewalks, et cetera, the general fund, there is no dedicated source. There is about $500,000 a year in street and alley funds that come from the state that goes towards the local streets, but it's not near enough. So that's the dedicated funding source for those areas. We do have a trail plan, a master trail plan. The city's been successful in getting Department of Transportation grants for a number of years for the trail program. We're not successful this last year, or in this next year. I do not believe ODOT will have grants this next year. They've kind of caught up that program, and they're waiting to refund it. So there's not immediately currently grants coming from ODOT because they're reworking their financial program for trails. But we've been very good at acquiring those grants in the past. I think that's the questions you had.
Do we know how much, have a dollar value of an approximate amount of how many sidewalks were triggered in this mechanism over the course of the past year?
Do not. Do not.
we have a way in order to be able to find that out without,
I'm sure.
magic wand. I'd be curious to find that because I understand where you're coming from in terms of whether the onus should be on the city. I'd be curious to see whether or not, what that would look like in order for the city to be able to match out of capital funds, whatever came from that pot to make it more of a consistent and more robust a fund to come from. Now, no guarantees there. I'd just be curious to what what that would look like. So if you could give me an idea what that number would look like at some point, I'd appreciate it.
I'd like to
If I could, well, if I could say something, I just did some quick math, and based on your numbers, sir, you get about a mile out of $240,000 at a 4-foot wide sidewalk. And how many miles of streets do we have? About 200 miles?
About 300 miles.
Okay, so,
But, yeah.
so that's kind of, I think, perhaps looking at the big picture, how much money we're talking about, how many sidewalks you can do, how long a sidewalk you could do per year. It's going to take quite a few years. The sidewalk should last 40 years, but it kind of gives you the
I'm not
idea.
opposing putting it on every street.
Well, I'm just trying to look at the big picture, yeah.
Like I said earlier, we pick those priorities
Right.
where we want them.
And there's a lot out there right now. So,
Exactly. I was looking at that today, driving around. A lot of those are already in.
right.
Well, and if we go by the ordinance, just, with you here, I'd bring up, we have some city streets out by the airport. We've got a big project going on there, and as a taxpayer, I would hate to have to see you put a sidewalk on Market from the tracks to 66 down
I'd hate to see
66
you do
and
that,
the
too.
ribbon road that goes back behind, which by the ordinance, that's what the city should be doing, is putting sidewalks there. But that's not where people are going to walk.
Right,
That is
and it's not very
absolutely-
practical.
It's horrifically unnecessary. I would never suggest that. And that's why we have to concentrate on, well, the ordinance says we got to put them out there, so we're going to spend an extra $1.5 million on sidewalks. No, we need that being designated to the areas we're walking to. Just like you said, maybe we pick, okay, where are we going to go from the schools? Waller Junior High has some new sidewalks leading into the neighborhoods. That's where we could say, that's where we want some of those. Or if we're that close to connecting to the trail, maybe we want to go ahead and connect those neighborhoods and certain arterial streets and stuff.
So are those the priority? So I guess the next question is going to be, how are we going to set those priorities? Do we want to do it by map? Do we want to do it by neighborhood? Do we want to use it as a particular facility, like you said, schools, hospitals? I mean, what would be the preference for you all here in terms of what do we want that indicator to be? Because we need to be able to set priorities in some way. And
Where's the most public good? We spend our dollars. I mean, ultimately, I was going to inquire before we go there, private, public assistance. How many assessment districts do we have that have been adopted? And Carol, you probably have a perspective on this. Just like when you did the downtown, every owner paid a portion. The assessment districts. And if we were to be able to go to the neighborhoods that have a need, where there would be an expectation, if you do this much, the city will help you with this process. And that would be another way to address it. But I'm curious about that as we look at the priorities.
I'd be curious how you, just simply because you're going to deal with low-income neighborhoods at that point are going to get passed over completely. Their expendable income is non-existent.
But that is a tool. You are right, Commissioner.
It is a solution, this is just a tool.
Yeah, but this is a way to
And there
encourage.
also is a bid, business improvement districts. There's assessment districts, business improvement districts. Those are tools that are available to cities like Enid in the state. Now, they may not work, or they may not be practical or popular, but certainly you could do that. So, for example, on Garriott, where we've been doing the variances, that's mainly between Oakwood and Garland. You could establish an assessment district and have those property owners pay into that and have that sidewalk
Fund
built
would be there. We would-
all at one time. Now, I don't know if that would be something they would be wanting to do, but that's a
It's for the
tool.
greater good and assessment for public safety.
Then you don't have the sidewalks to nowhere.
But I think that's a tool that the city commission will decide which one they want to apply. I salute your efforts tonight because you're looking at the big picture of deciding where to put sidewalks. I don't think you've quite gotten there, but I've taken pretty good notes. I think we're pretty solid on the residential, new residential. We like the trails. We like what we did on Broadway, because if you live north or south of Broadway, you can walk a block or two, boom, you're on that trail, and then you can either go to the campuses or downtown. Arterial roads naturally get sidewalks like on Willow, when those happen. We want to have safe routes to schools. And our school system is pretty well distributed throughout the community. And if you start doing concentric circles around those, then it's not too far before you've got a small connection, and now you've got that happening. So did I miss any, Carl? And then retail centers. We've identified that people are walking for exercise, and they're doing it out of their home and they're doing it on the trail. But we also have people that are walking because they want to get someplace. They either want to purchase a good and service, or they're wanting to get to employment. And most of the pathways to do that is going to be along an arterial. They may have no sidewalk in their neighborhood, particularly the neighborhood I live in, which is south of Garriott and west of Van Buren. Indian Hills, a lot of people call that. There are no sidewalks there, but I can walk over to Van Buren or Garriott, and boom, I got a sidewalk that takes me to a Walgreens or a CVS or a Brahms. So we do want people to walk to our commercial centers. In the old comp plan, we called those nodes. Some of you may remember those. In the new comp plan, they refer to them as neighborhood centers or community centers. And community centers are your big ones, which are going to be like Atwood's and Lowe's and Walmart. And we're going to have a community center there where we're redeveloping Lahoma Courts. But you go up to the new Walmart neighborhood center where we're doing the intersection, that's a neighborhood. And because we're doing the intersection there, we're doing sidewalks as well. But again, the heavy lift is building the intersection, and the sidewalk just kind of comes along. It's not free, but it's a small proportionate to the overall project. So, and you're going to have sidewalks on the boulevard that go north of that intersection. So I think you're doing good. You just need to go a little bit further. Where do you want them? There's lots of ways to figure out the triggers. There's going to be, the responsibilities are either going to be on state highways, which are your 412 and 81, be the state. Local streets are going to be the city of Enid. Or is it the private property owner that butts that pays? I mean, those are decisions that I think you're going to come back and make at a future study session, and I assume we're just going to keep going these each month until you're done. But I encourage you not to make all those decisions at one meeting. I think focus on where, and if you don't feel, we're running out of time. If you don't think we've finished the where, we can pick that up next month and finish that. But I think once you have your where in place, and designated areas is another way, concentrated areas, we're all saying the same thing, then you can go to who's going to do it and when. And the when is the trigger. And then funding. Does that make sense?
Go ahead.
I think to your point, we're probably going to have to go with a combination route of maps and items, whether that be schools or places of work or groceries or what have you, because there is definitely a contingent that's not served by any form of public transportation, that doesn't have their own vehicles, that you will see out walking. And when you're trying to walk around with your little plastic bags, they're so prone to ripping out. You don't need to be walking in the street or within inches of cars passing by. And I think that's where we really need to focus our attention, is those folks that that's how they get around.
And that's the great thing about the walk trail is because there are a certain amount of people that do use that as their primary highway of transportation.
Yeah.
Especially late at night. I know there's people walking on the trail 2 or 4 o'clock in the morning that are coming to and going to work on bicycles and on foot. And so I think we look at the trail plan, and then we look at those targeted specificity items in schools and places like that, in our retail corridor. So.
Are there existing studies with the public schools as to which schools have deficiencies in safe access for students as well as adults? Or is that in existence?
Don't know if any such studies from school, or maybe we do have the ADA compliance program does provide for spending about $300,000 a year on ADA compliance. In the recent years, that has been to extend sidewalks within a block and improve sidewalks in 2 blocks of schools. So there's a number of schools over the last, I think, 3 years that we have been adding sidewalks on for that program. The last one being the one completed around Coolidge School. That was about $350,000 cost, and our cost per foot was about $73. But the site includes the sidewalks. You got to rework the driveways, ramps, sometimes street crossings, sometimes retaining walls, sometimes right-of-way acquisition to make those things work. So to answer your question, I don't know if the school has one, but the city of Enid has been pursuing that for the ADA board's recommendations on putting sidewalks around schools.
Primary grant writers for the city, are we involved now? Do we have pending grants as it relates to this type of additional trails or sidewalks or any other green initiatives?
Well, the grant official isn't here, Stephanie isn't here tonight, so I can't answer that. We do have a project working for safe routes to school for Glenwood School on Chestnut, and that project is under design now. But the ODOT funding has provided for design work. There is not currently a grant to provide for construction. Similar as what I mentioned on other trails. We have not been successful this last year in getting grants and ODOT on that. So the current project I'm aware of, it's under design, is for safe routes to school for Glenwood School. That would be along Chestnut to get to Glenwood.
Are these grants primarily ODOT, or are there other federal grants and there are other sources? Do we continue to study that on an ongoing basis from the council standpoint? That's a very important.
And surely we're not limited to just ODOT and some of these.
No, we're not. We have a grant, there's a grant person who works on that continuously throughout the city on a number of different areas. But ODOT we've been successful in getting those for trails.
And part of the reason we're successful is we have a trails plan. It's not Chris Bauer's business triggering it or someone else's. There's a plan and they like to participate in that. So it's back to deciding where you want sidewalks and creating a project and then go look for a grant to help you get that done.
Can you bring that to the next study session? Like, this is what the existing trails, like where they are, and then if there's other areas where we know trails are going in, but they're not constructed yet.
I don't want to speak on Robert's behalf, but can you answer that to where it'll be true what you can bring back?
Sure, we can bring back the trail plan, which is part of the master plan and on the GIS, and we can identify where the trails are in place. And there is the trail that's designed is the trail to Vance Air Force Base, which is designed, but we have not been able to get the funding to construct it, not in this last year's budget, and they'll be trying again next year a bit.
I think that'll help pull together the where question.
Could I add to that, Robert? And if you can't, that's fine. Can we, on that same map that Commissioner Hall is asking for, show the schools that we've done so they can see that?
Sure.
On the
That can be
overall
accomplished.
mosaic of the city? Because you might start seeing the trails and Broadway and the schools, and then, here's a project. If we just do this one link, we've linked miles of sidewalk together. But because we're looking at them as individual projects up to this point. And so that's good about tonight is we're looking at the whole city.
Another step to that, I know it'd be probably fairly difficult, but where do you already have sidewalks in place to add to it, just so you can kind of go the next step of connecting the dots?
And that might be something we have to use screens and just Google Map in and out. Because that's turning into a lot.
We've got some sidewalks that look like they've been in a bad movie. And so,
They're old. I mean, they're dressed in big trees. And
I think we're happy to do all that, but that may be more than what we can accomplish next month.
Right.
but we're all on
Let's
the right
do the
track.
trails
We're on
and
the
the
same
schools and
page.
see
So
where
that's,
we're at.
right. So how much was the project per mile on the Broadway project approximately? What was the budget?
I don't
Just the trail portion as you discuss what is deemed trail.
Well, we had to do the driveways and the ramps at the intersections, so it was more than just the width of the concrete. I don't remember the budget. Do you?
Yeah, I don't recall. I'll get that for you.
But a project is it terminates there on the east side of the railroad tracks. I mean, it needs to make that 300 foot connection to downtown. Is it the consensus from the commission, we want to have a study session every month until your body of work is done?
I'm fine with
I
Yeah, I
think
think,
so.
Okay.
I think we're on the right,
Easiest way
I
to
think
get
we're on the right
everybody
track
together.
here.
We'll just keep doing it until we're done.
And if you can provide the minutes to us, that would be.
I will be happy to
That would
do
be
that.
splendid, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So it is now 6 o'clock. We're going to shift gears here a little bit, and I'm going to welcome you to the normal Metropolitan Area Planning Commission meeting, our March meeting here, the 18th of March 2019. First order is to call roll again.
Mark Arnold.
Here.
Whitney Hall.
Here.
Marvin Kusick. Eddie Mack. David Mason.
Here.
Cole Reen.
Here.
Don Roberts. James Simonek. David Trojan.
Here.
Jonathan Waddell.
Here.
You have a quorum.
First item is to consider approval of minutes of the regular Metropolitan Area Planning Commission meeting of February 25, 2019.
So move.
I have a motion to accept.
Second.
I have a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That carries. Okay, item number 3.1, consider an appointment to the Historic Preservation Commission.
The current member is Cole Ring, and he is term limited out on the Historic Preservation Commission, so we need another member from Planning Commission to serve on the Historic Preservation Commission. It is primarily a seasonal board because Historic Preservation works with the outside of the home. So we're coming into our season where we have a lot of paint requests, roofs, doors and window replacement. We see that slow down over the winter months. So it meets every month as need. So there'd be 12 meetings, whoever would like to do this. But what I'm telling you from a practical standpoint, it's about 6, maybe 7, just because in the wintertime, they may be working on the inside and the Historic Preservation doesn't have any control in there. So it's all on the outside. So it's a lot weather driven, the amount of meetings we have. Did I capture that about right, Carla?
Yes. And it's the first Thursday of every month, and it's at 4 p.m. in the afternoon.
And it meets in this building in the lower level.
We also do discuss some of the funding when the state gives us dollars for state historic preservation. We've done some studies. We have nominated some buildings to historic register. We've done some surveys of neighborhoods downtown, and so we make recommendations on those and things as well. So I'm term limited. If you guys don't choose somebody tonight, I'm stuck serving until we do in fact pick somebody. So
As a board member of Main Street, I'm interested, but I actually have to go before the city commission tomorrow to stay on this board because my 3 years are up, so.
Will and I would make, if you were interested in that and can serve as the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission's representative, I would suggest nominating you. And
Contingent on.
And if you don't get reelected, which we hope you do.
We do hope you're back.
The worst case scenario is I get to go next month to Historic Preservation Committee again. And so unless somebody else wants to serve in that, or unless you want to table it until there's more people here, I mean, it's your pleasure.
Do we need to make a motion?
We do need to make a motion.
Are you willing to do it like that?
That would be fine. I don't know if any of the people not.
Just to wait until we have our next meeting, we'll know factually what's happening then. And you can continue on.
If somebody wants to make a motion to table this until next meeting, we can certainly.
There would be nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that.
We'll
Make that
continue to
motion.
take care of historic preservation.
When's the next historic preservation meeting?
Let me get that to
I
you.
don't have my calendar, I'm
I
sorry.
do, hang on.
4th of
It's
April.
it's April 4th. Yes, it is, Commissioner.
It's good.
So that you can make the next meeting, I motion to appoint contingent on the reappointment to the MAPC board.
Second.
Yes.
Okay, I have a motion. I have a second. All of those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? There are none.
Sound like you got one vote on the committee.
So good luck. Yeah.
I don't know if we even heard if anyone else is interested, so.
No, you're a valuable member of this board. Appreciate appreciate your service and leadership.
Okay, so that brings us to 4.1, consider a request for a variance to City of Enid Ordinance 1061, sidewalk required for a property located at 2430 North Jackson Street. And I
We
believe,
need to have a motion to table this because we do not have the 3/4 vote. I can happily report to you, the city commission, at your recommendation to change the ordinance to a simple majority, they agreed, they did that. However, it has to be published in a 30-day waiting period, and that was not accomplished by this meeting, but we will have accomplished all of those hurdles and obstacles for next, and so we'll never have this problem again.
Motion to table?
Second.
I have a motion, I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That will be tabled. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I have a first, second, and third. All those in favor? Aye.
Didn't quite make it 6.
Thank you for joining us for the Enid Metropolitan Area Planning Commission meeting. All meetings are broadcast on local cable channel 12 and in high definition channel 112. In addition, this meeting is live streamed on the web at enidtv.org. If you have any questions or comments regarding this broadcast, please visit the City of Enid website at enid.org.